The rain that night came like an answer to a question no one had asked. Safia Mwend was closing her tiny shop when a shadow slipped into her doorway, soaked and shaking. It was Kalina, her older sister, with a baby wrapped in a newspaper and eyes that did not look like a sister's. Kalina did not sit or explain. She pressed the child into Safia's arms and whispered, "Please, just keep her for a while," before turning back into the rain without a goodbye. At first Safia thought it would be a week, or a month. She made a bed of old cloth and hummed lullabies she had learned at her mother's knee. She fed the child, named her Lena because the name felt like sunlight, and watched the days stack into years. The town of Makoro noticed. Neighbors who once nodded at Safia's door brought porridge, an extra blanket, a used toy. Her little tailoring shop grew because people loved the way she stitched care into each seam. Lena learned to thread needles the way other children learned to throw a ball. Safia washed, mended, and whispered stories into a child's hair at night, letting the small, ordinary acts of love become the proof of motherhood. There were hard nights when money ran thin and nights when Safia cried quietly with the baby asleep against her chest. There were bright mornings when Lena laughed at dragonflies on the lake and called Safia Mama with total trust. Years made a family out of two. In the quiet of their rented room, with the lake breathing outside, Safia kept a promise she had never been asked to make and found that love, over time, could be the only law that mattered. 10 years had passed and life had a steady, honest rhythm. Safia's little shop smelled of starch and thread, her hands moved with a calm that came from practice, and the town of Makoro knew her by the way she folded a shirt or stitched a hem. Lena was 10 now, full of questions and quick smiles, the kind of child who chased dragonflies by the lake and brought home odd stones that she declared treasures. She called Safia Mama without thinking, and Safia felt proud in a way she had never expected. They had small rituals that made the days bright. On market mornings Lena raced beside the bicycle as Safia delivered a dress, and at night they read by the low lamp until the boat horns on the lake sounded. The past, with its thunder and sharp edges, felt like a story told in another life. Then one afternoon a knock broke the pattern. It was not the lazy knock of a neighbor. It was hard and fast, the kind that says something important has arrived. Safia opened the door to find Kalina standing there as if she had stepped out of a different world. She wore silk that flashed like water, her hair set and shiny, and 2 men in dark suits waited behind her. One held a thick envelope marked Makoro High Court. Kalina smiled the way strangers do when they want something. Her eyes were not the wild eyes from that rain, they were cool and practiced. She did not hug Safia. She held the court papers up and said, simply, "I want Lena back," and then she used words that sounded like a blade. She said Safia had illegally kept her child. Safia felt the room tilt. Paper drifted from her fingers. The word illegal felt like a lie wrapped in law. Lena stood behind Safia at first, small hand curled to the hem of Mama's skirt, and then she stepped forward because children meet change with curiosity. Kalina knelt and offered a shiny watch and a story of a life in a far city, of schools with white walls and a mother who had been remade. The neighbors gathered, because news moves faster than wind in a small town. Some faces were kind, others puzzled, some whispered that maybe Safia had held on too long. Traders came by the shop and waited to see which way the town would lean. Safia's customers watched her with new eyes, and the stitches she made felt suddenly very small against the weight of a summons. Fear rose like heat in her chest. 10 years of diapers, of scraped knees and late nights, filled her memory like pages. She remembered every small thing that proved she was Lena's mother. She remembered the first laugh, the first lost tooth, the way Lena learned to thread a needle. Standing in her doorway, with the court papers between them, Safia understood the future had become a battleground and that everything she loved could be argued away by words on paper. The courtroom felt too small for the storm it held. When the judge called the case, the room filled with people from Makoro and a few strangers who had followed Kalina's lawyers. Kalina sat like someone who belonged to another world, polished and calm, while Safia's shoulders were steady but tight as a drum. The lawyers spoke in different languages. Kalina's lawyer used sharp words and slow facts to shape a story that made Safia look like a thief. He said she had taken Lena on purpose, that she wanted a child to warm an empty life, and he asked the court to correct a wrong that had gone on for 10 years. Safia's lawyer was quiet but fierce. He did not have bright suits or a stack of papers. He had memory and a list of small truths. He told the judge about market mornings, about the way Lena hummed when Safia stitched, about the night Safia found Lena feverish and sat with a damp cloth on her forehead until dawn. He asked the court to measure motherhood by acts that build trust, not only by a birth certificate. Witness after witness came forward. Neighbors spoke in simple language about blankets offered, porridge shared, how Lena had always run to Safia when she fell. Lena's teacher described a girl who could not be confused about who had changed her school uniform 100 times or who had stood by her at the parents' meeting. These voices were soft but they stacked up like stones. Then came a man who said he had seen Kalina leave Makoro with a cheap bag and a dangerous promise in her eyes. A former friend from Zambura told a different story. He spoke about debts and hidden threats, about people who tracked old mistakes and made new ones. His words hinted that Kalina had run not to become better but to hide. Under questioning, Kalina's story shifted. She had said she left for work and a new life. Now small details did not match. Dates did not line up. A photograph was shown, one that put Kalina in a place she had denied. Each contradiction made the courtroom tilt. Lena listened from the front row. Her face showed flickers of confusion, then pain, then a fierce protectiveness that surprised everyone. At one point she stood and said she wanted to speak. Her voice was clear and young. She described bedtime stories, how Safia mended her dolls, the small rituals that felt like truth. The judge asked probing questions. The lawyers traded sharp paper arguments and quieter human ones. Outside, gossip became a river through Makoro, carrying sympathy to Safia and whispers about Kalina's past. Inside, testimony peeled back more than memory. It opened a window on a hidden life that suggested danger, quick money, and promises that break. The courtroom became a place where law and love collided, where every small kindness was weighed next to a legal claim. When the day closed, the judge had much to think about and the town had a story they would tell for years. Rumors spread faster than dust in Makoro, and Kalina knew how to throw them into the wind. Before the judge had finished hearing witnesses, leaflets with half-truths appeared at the market, and soft voices at the well began to say that Safia was unstable and had kept a child by force. Kalina's new circle moved like a tide, the lawyers dropped hints to reporters, a carefully placed neighbor spoke of strange nights at Safia's home, and an old friend who had never liked her came by the shop with a look that said, "Don't come near." Customers who had laughed with Safia for years started to glance away. Men who had once joked under her shade now pointed and whispered. The small kindnesses that had built Safia's life felt fragile under the weight of the new story. Safia could have broken then, but instead she leaned into the only weapon she had, truth. Quiet and careful, she began to look past the suits and the glossy papers. She asked a bus driver about a ticket stub she had found in a drawer. She visited a cheap phone stall where Kalina's number had briefly been used. She followed a trail of small things a missing person leaves behind, a faded hotel stamp, a name in a visitor book, a debt note tucked inside a borrowed shoe. Each clue led away from the neat world Kalina presented in court and toward Zambura City, a place people in Makoro said was dark with deals and danger. Safia learned the names of men who lent more than money and of women who kept secrets for a price. She found a list of debts with Kalina's handwriting and a photograph of Kalina laughing in a place she had sworn she never visited. The more Safia dug, the clearer a new picture became. Kalina had not simply gone to find work. She had been caught in betrayals, people who trusted her and then lost money, friends who turned into enemies when promises failed, and a debt that grew like a shadow until she disappeared. Now, with money and new lawyers at her side, Kalina seemed less like a penitent sister and more like someone trying to trade Lena for protection, influence, or a way to settle old scores. Safia showed what she found to a neighbor who could read contracts and to a kind teacher who kept records. They copied receipts, wrote down names, and kept the notes safely hidden because they knew Kalina could use power to destroy evidence. Outside court, Kalina pushed her version of events until the town's mood wavered. Inside, Safia's quiet findings began to trickle into testimony, turning whispers into threads that, when pulled, threatened to unravel the clean story Kalina had painted. As the tug-of-war widened, Makoro itself felt like it was choosing sides. Some doors stayed shut to Safia, but others opened wider, with people bringing food, sharing watchful eyes at night, and guarding the small shop as if it were a shrine. In the middle of it all, Lena watched and learned what courage looks like, a woman who will not let lies take the life she has made. Lena found herself caught between two worlds and she did not know how to breathe. One day Kalina arrived with boxes that smelled new and bright, with toys Lena had never seen and clothes with glitter that made her eyes wide. Kalina spoke in soft, exciting words about far places, about schools with tall doors and shining floors, about a life where everything was easy. She gave Lena a phone with pictures of airplanes and a promise that they would leave Makoro together. At first Lena felt a quick thrill. Gifts make any child feel chosen, and the new things fit like a sudden bright dress. Safia watched from the doorway, hands folded, feeling each gift as a small cut. She knew she could not buy Lena a phone or a glitter dress. Safia had no silk or lawyers, but she had mornings. She had the mornings Lena climbed into her lap to help wind the bobbin and the nights Lena whispered secrets into her hair. She had the scraped knees she had kissed and the fevers she had sat through. Safia answered Kalina with the plain truth of daily life. She showed Lena the tiny notebooks where she kept notes about school fees and the dates of Lena's first steps. She reminded Lena of the small, steady things that built trust, not the flash of new things. Sometimes Lena ran to Kalina with new gifts and stories and then to Safia with a question that had no easy answer. At school Lena tried to be the same child she always was, but inside she felt pulled. Her friends noticed she was quieter some days and louder on others. She began to test both women like a child testing water temperature, dipping a toe in, then pulling back. Kalina took Lena to a city store where she let her choose a dress and a necklace and Lena felt a kind of dizzy joy. But when the dress needed a stitch or the necklace broke, Kalina's interest faded and she returned to making big promises. Safia fixed the dress without complaint and tied the necklace back with string. Those small repairs meant more to Lena than either woman guessed. The tug-of-war grew messy. Kalina used sweets and trips and pictures to shape a dream. Safia used bedtime songs and recipes and the memory of being there when Lena was afraid. Sometimes Lena cried at night and did not know whose lap to choose. Sometimes she stood in front of the mirror and tried on the words mother and family and felt them change shape. The town watched and murmured. Teachers kept an eye on Lena and neighbors brought food and quiet support to Safia. Slowly Lena learned that love is more than gifts and speeches. It is the person who shows up when the sky breaks and the person who stays when the doors are closed. In the end Lena's heart did not flip like a coin. It learned to hold two truths at once and in that hard space she began to choose the steady light of the hands that had always held her. The day felt heavier than the others, as if the air in the courtroom had learned to wait. Just when Kalina's polished argument seemed to be winning hearts and the judge's face had grown thoughtful, a new figure stood up from the back and walked forward. He called himself Musa and said he used to live in Zambura. He said Kalina had been his friend once, and then his voice dropped low and simple as he told things that made the room lean in. Musa spoke about debts that were not just money, about men who made bargains with empty promises, and about how Kalina had run not to find work but to escape a danger she had helped create. He said Lena's father had not died by chance. He said there had been an argument, a deal that fell apart, and then a night when too many people were angry. Musa did not accuse with flair. He told small details that fit like pieces in a puzzle. He produced a photograph of Kalina with a man who matched old descriptions, a torn receipt for a motel room in a town Kalina had denied visiting, and a note in Kalina's handwriting that showed a payment had been due the month Lena's father disappeared. Each paper was a quiet thing, but together they sounded loud. Kalina's face went pale. Her lawyers stood and tried to stop the testimony with quick questions about how Musa knew these things. They said he had waited too long to come forward and that his memory might be wrong. Musa answered slowly. He said fear had kept him quiet, that people in Zambura do not speak freely, and that he had come because he could not watch a child be used as a pawn. The judge let the questions come and the answers stayed. The courtroom murmured. Kalina tried to remake her story. She said she had left to protect herself and that any trouble she had touched did not have her name on it. But the new evidence pushed past her words. Lena sat very still, her fingers twisting in her lap, and when the witness described the night he last saw Lena's father, the girl's face changed in a way that made everyone look away. Safia listened like a woman holding her breath until the moment she could breathe again. Outside, reporters scribbled and neighbors whispered. The town that had been divided began to tilt back toward the woman who had raised Lena. The judge asked for more records, for police notes to be checked and for the dates to be matched. What had looked like a clean case of law now felt messy and human. The surprise witness did not close the book, but he cracked it open wide enough that truth could be read in more than one way. The courtroom that afternoon learned that stories people tell to survive can have sharp, dangerous edges, and that sometimes a single voice, spoken in plain words, can change the direction of a whole life. The courtroom held its breath as the judge read the decision, and every small sound felt loud, from the click of a pen to the quiet rustle of a skirt. He spoke slowly so Lena could hear, and so the town outside could one day tell the exact words. The judge said the law must protect a child, and the law must also respect truth. He named the facts he had seen, the years of care, the school records, the testimonies about scraped knees and fevered nights, and he named the new evidence that had shown danger and secrets in Kalina's past. In the end he chose a path between two hard things. He ruled that Kalina could not take Lena from the home where she had been raised for 10 years, because a child's stability matters, and because motherhood had been proved by years of quiet love. At the same time he granted Kalina scheduled visitation, saying a child can know both sides of her story and that a court should not cut a tie if contact can be safe and honest. Kalina held her papers like a shield, and her face showed a grief that was not softened by the law. Safia stood very still, her hands trembling, and then she felt Lena slip her fingers into hers. Outside the judge's words, the town felt many things at once. Some people nodded with relief, others felt sympathy for Kalina, and most of all they felt the small town had watched a life change and then choose to hold the thing that mattered most. Safia and Lena walked out into the late sunlight of Makoro like two people who had been tested and found not perfect but strong. They did not pretend the wounds would vanish. They knew scars would show in quiet moments, and they knew Kalina would come to visits with gifts and stories. But as they stepped beside the lake, with the boat horns far off and the market beginning to stir, Lena tightened her grip on Safia's hand and said, "Mama," and the single word folded every hard day into one plain truth, the life they had lived together.